Right away, you see a sign advertising Brazilian food, funk music coming from the car, and a Brazilian flag on the facade. It could be anywhere in Brazil, like Goiás, Minas Gerais, or São Paulo. But here there is snow on the sidewalk, and just a few minutes away is Manhattan, New York. How did a place like this come about? Why has English almost disappeared from the streets? And how did an American neighborhood become this unlikely piece of Brazil outside the country? Today, Bello Mundo takes you to Ironbound, the most Brazilian place in the United States. Before this neighborhood became a piece of Brazil in the United States, it was just a simple area in the New York metropolitan region. The state is New Jersey, and the surrounding city is one of the main urban centers on the East Coast. It is right next to Manhattan, connected by trains, buses, and bridges that carry workers back and forth every day. This specific district, which would later become famous for its mix of cultures, was born in a low-lying part of the city, near the Passaic River. In the beginning, it was all swampland, farms, and difficult terrain to occupy. Nothing there resembled urban life. It was a difficult place, isolated, and completely unglamorous. The change began when train lines started to cut through the area. The tracks attracted warehouses, depots, and metal structures. In a short time, the place became a hub for heavy industry, a kind of urban island of iron. Hence the name Ironbound. But to make all this work, steel machines and locomotives were not enough. People were needed, lots of people, and they came. First came the Germans, then the Irish. Next came Poles, Italians, and other Europeans who crossed the Atlantic, fleeing hunger, war, or simply a lack of prospects. Entire families disembarked in Newark and settled exactly where the work was, around the factories, warehouses, and depots that kept the city running. There was no luxury, but there were jobs, and in that context, that was everything. As rent was cheaper in that part of town, the neighborhood began to take on a life of its own. People who lived a few blocks from the press, the boiler, and the train. Workers who walked home smelling of grease, coal, and sweat stuck to their clothes. It was a hard, repetitive, but predictable routine. And predictability was a luxury for those who had left everything behind. Over time, industrial warehouses began to share space with taverns, boarding houses, and small bakeries. Simple places, designed for those who needed to eat well, sleep close to work, and talk in their own language after a hard day. The streets began to change their sound. A new accent appeared here, another there, and little by little the neighborhood learned something that would become part of its identity forever. It learned to live in more than one language at the same time. With each decade, a new wave of immigrants left their mark. Nothing was erased. Everything was superimposed. A group arrived, adapted to what already existed, and added something new. And it was precisely this mixture, this ability to absorb without destroying, that set the stage for the next chapter in history. From the beginning of the 20th century, a character entered the scene that would change the face of the neighborhood forever. Portuguese immigrants. Many came from Minho, a region in northern Portugal, known for its stone villages, vineyards, and a life deeply connected to the land. Others arrived from Trás-os-Montes, in the far northeast of the country, a mountainous, isolated region where winter is harsh and subsistence farming was often the only option. Families also came from central Portugal, from smaller villages, almost always workers, small traders, or people accustomed to manual labor. These Portuguese immigrants were generally bricklayers, carpenters, factory workers, hardened people who saw America as a real chance to change their lives. They wanted to work, save money, send it home, and in some cases, return with some dignity. They concentrated on a street that crossed the neighborhood from end to end, Ferry Street. This avenue became the backbone of the Portuguese community and, over time, earned a nickname that became a symbol. In English, it was still Ferry Street, but for those who spoke Portuguese, it became Portugal Avenue. It was like a shared secret, a code of belonging. The nickname grew so much that it became official. Today, many signs, as you will see on the screen, show both names, Ferry Street and Portugal Avenue, side by side. Some are even decorated with the colors of the Portuguese flag. But it wasn't just the sign that changed. There were bakeries with fresh bread, restaurants with painted tiles on the walls, bars with green wine, music by Amalia Rodriguez, and European soccer on TV. There were also social clubs, such as the Portuguese Sport Club, founded in 1921. To this day, it is one of the main cultural and community centers of the Portuguese diaspora in Newark. It was there that many people celebrated weddings, baptisms, Benfica victories, and even the Carnation Revolution. The community grew so much that Portuguese-language newspapers, churches with masses for Portuguese faithful, and even offices of companies that directly served this audience appeared. TAP, Portugal's national airline, even set up a base right there in the neighborhood. And for a long time, the Ironbound was known as the Portuguese neighborhood of Newark. A piece of America where Portuguese was spoken, seafood was eaten, caldo verde was drunk, and Lisbon politics were discussed as if it were on the other side of the Atlantic. But this story was about to take on a new flavor. And that's when Brazil entered the picture. While the Portuguese were consolidating their little Lisbon in the middle of New Jersey, Brazil was facing a complicated period. The 80s became known as the Lost Decade, marked by out-of-control inflation, political crisis, wages eroding month by month, and the old desire to leave the country beginning to gain strength. And when the 90s arrived, bringing the real plan and apparent stability, this desire to leave did not diminish. On the contrary, many people began to see the United States as a place where they could start over. This movement created a huge migratory flow. One of the most common routes led straight to this neighborhood, which already had a strong Portuguese presence. And why this neighborhood? Because there was already a base prepared by the Portuguese. There were Portuguese businesses, there was a community, there were jobs. It was possible to arrive without speaking English and still get by. In the beginning, Brazilians were guests in the Portuguese house. They worked in Portuguese restaurants, rented rooms with Portuguese families, bought bread at the same bakery, and got their hair cut at the same salon. Portuguese from Portugal was still dominant on the streets, but slowly, without fanfare, something began to change. Brazilians began to open their own businesses. Grocery stores with names from neighborhoods in Minas Gerais appeared, boutiques with references to Brazilian cities, beauty salons with signs entirely in Portuguese, and of course churrascarias, the ultimate symbol of Brazilian cuisine, offering rodizio, picanha, rice, beans, farofa, guaraná, feijão tropeiro, rabada, and dobradinha, all displayed in large letters, without translation, with green and yellow flags stamped on the facade. Studies on the Brazilian diaspora indicate that Essex County, where Newark is located, is home to tens of thousands of Brazilians. There is no exact number because many avoid participating in formal censuses, but their presence is noticeable. In some blocks, it literally feels like being in Brazil. Just cross the street to see 3 or 4 signs in a row written only in Portuguese. On one side, markets sell agulhinhe rice, carioca beans, farofa, guaraná, filled cookies, and Brazilian coffee. On the other, bakeries sell pão na chapa, pão de queijo, sonho, and bolo de fubá. Further on, a boutique offering clothing, jewelry, and even payment of Brazilian energy and water bills, all in Portuguese for those who are not yet fluent in English. The sound of the streets accompanies this transformation. Cars drive by playing sertanejo, pagode, samba, and sometimes even funk music that echoes across the block. It is common to see Brazilian flags in rear-view mirrors, national team jerseys, and conversations about the latest game or soap opera episode. For many people, living nearby is like having an extension of their hometown just a few minutes from home. And in the midst of it all, there is a curious irony. Centuries ago, Portugal colonized Brazil, and suddenly, Brazil ended up colonizing the Portuguese neighborhood in the United States. From colonized to colonizer. But this story doesn't just happen in the United States. Today, in Portugal, many people joke, or not so much joke, that Brazil is colonizing the country back. In recent years, a flood of Brazilians has moved to Lisbon, Porto, and other cities. If you were on planet Earth in 2025, you will surely remember the famous Brazilian Guiana meme. A joke that became a trend on social media, suggesting that Portugal had become the 28th Brazilian state. A joke that made many Portuguese people angry. But jokes aside, what exists today in Ironbound is a meeting place. Even with all this fame as a piece of Brazil, Ironbound has never ceased to be a multi-ethnic neighborhood. The Portuguese are still there. Spaniards and Ecuadorians form a huge community. Italians and Poles still have a presence. And the rest of the Latin population is very strong. People from Peru, the Dominican Republic, Mexico, and Cuba. On certain dates, the neighborhood becomes the stage for parties that seem to come from different countries, but which coexist in the same zip code. In June, Portugal Day takes place. The streets are filled with green and red flags, traditional music, typical foods, parades, and a crowd from all over the region. It's the kind of party that takes over the entire sidewalk, closes traffic, and fills the eyes of those who grew up far from their homeland. In September, it's time for Brazilian Day, an event with an improvised trio elétrico, stalls, concerts, the smell of barbecue on the sidewalk, and that party atmosphere that mixes pride with nostalgia. It's common to see children dressed up in the Brazilian national team shirt, people singing Axé music from the 2000s, and cues at the pastel stall. And it doesn't stop there. Throughout the year, there are also Ecuadorian parties, Italian celebrations, and Colombian events, each with its own music, flag, and menu, but all sharing the same streets, the same neighborhood, the same sense of belonging. The neighborhood is Brazilian, it is Portuguese, but it is also Latin in the broadest sense. It's the kind of place where you go out to buy a coffee and, without realizing it, you pass a Portuguese bakery, a Brazilian grocery store, an Ecuadorian shop, a Dominican barber shop. Sometimes all of this on the same block. A mix that, in many places around the world, would end up in chaos. But there, somehow, everything falls into place, and it becomes routine. The neighborhood has become an expert in living with differences, because there, being an immigrant is not the exception. It's the rule. Faith also enters into this mix of traditions, and the best example of this is in the churches. In addition to restaurants, markets, and beauty salons, the Ironbound is also home to two branches of the Universal Church of the Kingdom of God. That's right, two. One caters to Portuguese speakers, the other to Spanish speakers, and both operate within the same neighborhood. In practice, this means that the same religious group organizes services, meetings, and social activities tailored to each community. On one street, you'll find signs inviting people to meetings in Portuguese. On the other, the posters are all in Spanish. These are faithful who came from Brazil, Portugal, Ecuador, Colombia, Venezuela, Chile, from various parts of Latin America. And the Universal Church is not alone. Other churches also operate in the neighborhood: evangelicals, Catholics, Adventists, Baptists. In addition, there are community groups, associations, and NGOs that help those who have recently arrived. These organizations offer tutoring, immigration assistance, food distribution, cultural activities, and legal guidance. Some operate in church basements. Others occupy rented spaces or rely on volunteers who even use their own homes as a base. Many have been operating for decades, and much of the focus has always been on the immigrant population, who arrive with little money and a lot of hope. And they really need it. Because, contrary to what many people imagine, living in the United States is not the fairy tale that the movies sell. Not everyone can find a job easily. Not everyone arrives with the right documents. Not everyone has someone to help them in the beginning. Those who live there know that behind the colorful storefronts, there is a difficult daily life. Many immigrants work 2 jobs, long hours in restaurant kitchens, cleaning, construction, or delivery. For those who are starting their lives from scratch, without speaking English, without documents, or with little money in their pockets, life can be difficult. Even more so when the person comes from a country in crisis, without government support, and with everything going wrong if they don't find a support network. And there's one more thing that's changing the landscape: gentrification. Abandoned factories are turning into lofts and trendy condominiums. Brooklyn-style cafes and organic markets are beginning to take the place of bakeries and bars. Real estate prices are skyrocketing, taxes are increasing, and the pressure to remove long-time residents is growing. Suddenly, the same neighborhood that welcomed generations of immigrants is becoming too expensive for those who live off hard work, and the fear of losing their place is even apparent among those who were already more stable. For those who arrive full of expectations, the shock is inevitable. There are shop windows with food that reminds us of home, people speaking Portuguese, Spanish, Italian, and various other languages, parties with music and traditions from different cultures around the world. It seems like anything but an American neighborhood. But when the next month's bill arrives, there is no Brazilian way around it. This is the United States, with strict rules, harsh enforcement, little support network, and that constant feeling that any misstep could cost you your green card, your job, your rent. Sometimes even a small mistake in filling out a document becomes a headache. You have to be alert all the time because the consequences come quickly. Even so, Ironbound continues to function as a bridge. In the early years, it is a shelter, a place where you can reconnect with your roots, understand how the system works, get your documents, and find your first job. It is where many people learn that surviving is the first step before thriving. Then each person follows their own path. Some decide to stay. They raise their children there in a home where Portuguese, English, and Spanish are spoken. They build businesses, become part of the community, and help others adapt. And they become a reference for those who have just arrived. Others use the neighborhood as a springboard. They spend 2 or 3 years there, save money, learn the basics, and move to other cities or states where life may be cheaper or more peaceful. Places with more affordable rent, less traffic, or more professional opportunities. And maybe that's why so many people call Ironbound the most Brazilian city in the United States. It's not because the neighborhood has become official Brazilian territory or because the absolute majority there is Brazilian. Ironbound, in this scenario, has become a kind of collective welcome, a gateway for those who arrive with a suitcase full of plans but empty pockets. It's not paradise, but it's where many people have found a way to start over, and starting over, in this case, is already a lot. So, what do you think? Had you heard of this place before? If you were to move to America one day, Would you choose to live in a place that feels like an extension of Brazil? Or would you prefer to throw yourself straight into a neighborhood where almost no one speaks your language? Tell us in the comments what surprised you most about this video. If you liked the content, leave your like, share it, and of course, don't forget to activate Hypar's new feature. This helps the channel gain visibility and continue bringing you these unbelievable trips around our beautiful world. See you next time.